Hello and welcome to this podcast brought to you by the Nairobi Institute of Reformed Theology here at Emmanuel Baptist Church. My name is Joshua Lemayian. I'll be hosting this podcast, and today I am joined by Tim Avery, who currently teaches the biblical languages at NIRT, as well as Mr. Ndwati, who is a student at NIRT. Let's start with you, gentlemen, just telling us a bit more about yourselves. What do you do on a day-to-day basis apart from teaching and learning at NIRT? Let's start with you, Ndwati.
Yeah. Good to be here. Thank you, Lema. My name is Ndwati Murigi. In full, vocationally, I serve as a pastor at Nairobi Chapel Lavington. So that occupies most of our time in serving God's people. Aside from that, I have to say I am married to one lady wife, and it's been wonderful. It's very recent. It's 3 months at the time of this recording, and we are grateful to God for that. So, yeah.
Great. It's good to have you. Thanks, brother. Tim.
Yeah. So my name is Tim Avery. I hail from the United States. Been in Nairobi now for a little more than a year. Really happy to be here. Outside of teaching at NIRT, or NIRT, whatever you want to call it, I serve as publishing director for Ekklesia Afrika. So yeah, just overseeing our work of trying to make Christian books and literature more widely available and accessible for the church here.
Great. Yeah. If you would like to learn more about NIRT, which you just heard about from Tim, go to ecclesiaafrica.org. All the K sounds are K's, so Africa is not a C but a K. Okay, brothers, I've asked you here today to help us to talk and think more about the biblical languages. Let's start with you, Tim. Why is it important? Why would it be helpful for someone to learn the biblical languages?
Sure. So let me begin by saying that we have good Bible translations, and we can be very grateful for those. And many Christians and many pastors around the world will never have the privilege of studying the biblical languages. And so what we need to begin by saying is you don't need to know the biblical languages to be a faithful Christian or a faithful pastor. We have faithful Bible translations, and we should be very grateful for them. So why would we then want to study the biblical languages? There's a few things I think we can talk about here in terms of how it can help us to just listen a little bit more closely to God's Word. So the first way in which I think it can be helpful is when you are trying to interact with the biblical text in Hebrew or Greek. When you're doing that, it can be, and maybe interested to hear what Ndwati's experience has been with this so far. I think it can help to defamiliarize the text in a way, because it just feels different to encounter it there in the Greek or the Hebrew. You're usually having to read more slowly, and you just might notice things you wouldn't have otherwise. I can share one example there. Last year I was reading in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10, Jesus meeting the rich young ruler, and there's this part there where in the one translation it says, Jesus, looking at him, the rich young ruler, loved him and said to him, and then he gives this command to sell all you have, follow me. And then tragically, the rich young ruler can't handle that. He walks away. And there was something about reading this in the Greek for me that brought out just the texture of this moment. Because it says, just to read the English for you again, and Jesus, looking at him, loved him, and then said to him. Right, and I think actually even the English itself can potentially bring this across, but the Greek maybe a little more clearly. There's Jesus looking at him, and then in the Greek you can see he looks at him, and then it says he loved him, and then he said to him. It's a bit kind of a striking turn of phrase. I don't usually talk about I loved you like in that particular moment, but here it's this like this concentrated moment, instant of love, which we could either analyze as maybe a particular movement of love in the human soul of Christ, or maybe it's a way of just describing this act of love that Jesus exercises toward this man. But it really struck me in a beautiful way to see the scripture talking not only about the love of God in this very sweeping, constant sense of like God is love. That's kind of one end of the spectrum. God is always love. That is just who He is. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we can see a particular moment of a movement of love that Jesus is exercising toward this man right there in front of him. He looked at him, and after looking at him, he loved him. That hit me in the Greek in a way that, for whatever reason, it didn't in the English. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I would say is it could just defamiliarize the text for you, help you see things you wouldn't. I don't know if you want to comment on that before I ramble on further or not.
No, yeah, sure. I think maybe just in line with what you're saying, while we were doing one of our last sessions in our last Greek semester, I remember we had to translate John 11, I think it was from verse 20 to 44. And so one, I think this was encouraging because we were able to look at the Greek text, and for most of it, part of it, you needed a dictionary for some not so common words, but for what we had, we could. But the highlight for me is even as we were going through it in class, I remember that class being not just a class, but reading the text in the original language and it making more sense in a way, so to speak. And maybe to be more specific, and I don't know if Tim would agree with this, but I remember reading it and it felt it's the text of Lazarus being raised from the dead, and Jesus was very disturbed and stirred within himself with this that had happened. So there's death, there's an atmosphere of sorrow there's sorrow in the atmosphere, and I don't know, you'll read it, I guess, in the English, and it's there. But I guess when you I guess it's that idea of like there are elements within language that don't necessarily translate as easily into another language. And so you get to do a little bit more work to learn a certain language, and then even what is spoken in that language becomes more clearer or more potent in a sense. And so that was beautiful to be a part of. I remember seeing also a classmate cry, and I also don't know if it was that or they received a message from home. But I wondered if it was even for her, just, I guess, this landing in a different way. And so we came to class to see whether we translated our text well, but we came out, at least I came out challenged in a different way and encouraged. So it's just that you're able to hear the words in that actual language, and it does something, especially if something was lacking when translation happened.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Dottie, for that. So, Tim, would you say, so in teaching Hebrew and teaching, currently you're doing Hebrew, and Dottie, you're attending that class as well. Last year teaching Greek. Would you say there's ways in which, as Dottie is highlighting, that English is unequipped to sometimes ferry something that the author had in mind at that point? Of course, we believe that God oversees His word, and that His word is never in vain. But to what degree should the average reader be aware of that, and how much should that motivate them to desire to see and understand this word or this phrase or this book in light of how the original author did?
Yeah, great question. I would say on a basic level, the word translates, from one language to another, and we're not Muslims who think that the word of God just can't be translated and it has to be locked up in the original language. I think part of our basis for that is the fact that the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, many of parts of it were picked up by the apostles and used as, this is scripture that we can talk about. So we can talk about translations as scripture and treat them as such with confidence. And now I do think there are nuances that may not come out in the translation. Let me get there in a second. But before I get there, let me say even when your translation it's showing you, what you might see in the original language, which in most respects it is. I think even there, and this is for me the second benefit of engaging with the original text in the original language. The second benefit is being able to confirm or verify for yourself what I'm seeing in my translation is really what's going on in the original language. So to give an illustration of that, I talked on the first day of Hebrew class about Psalms 1 and 2. And many people observe with Psalms 1 and 2 that they really seem to go together, and they're folded together about what's sometimes called an inclusio, right? Something at the beginning, something at the end, top and tail that fold it together. The Psalm 1 begins, blessed is the man. Psalm 2 ends, blessed is the one who. And not all translations actually will make that clear to you, but many will make that clear to you that there's this inclusio going on there. The benefit of knowing a little bit of Hebrew is you can go have a look for yourself and say, oh yeah, that's actually the same Hebrew word there at the start of Psalm 1 and the same Hebrew word at the end of Psalm 2. So it's not, in that case, it's not showing you something you couldn't see in translation, but it helps you know it is really there. Right? But then to get more to what you just asked, there's a couple other areas where I do think there's payoff. So one is translations are necessarily interpretive, right? And whether that's what we might call a more dynamic type translation or a more formal equivalent or kind of more word-for-word type of translation, there are differences on that spectrum, but wherever you are on that spectrum, there's still an element of interpretation that goes into translation because no two languages are the same. And another benefit of knowing the original languages is either maybe being aware of an interpretive move made by the translators that you don't know was even made by them, and being able to revisit that for yourself. Or maybe you're looking at a couple different translations and you say, oh, these sound different. What's going on there? And if you don't have recourse to the original languages, well, maybe you just pick the translation that you think is going to preach better on Sunday. But we don't want to do that, right? So we actually want to kind of go back and revisit the question for ourselves. So, I mean, there could be a lot of examples with that kind of a thing. But to give just one example, Greek really loves participles. And you've been learning about that, right?
Yeah. Don't remind me. Yeah. In fact, actually remind me. Go ahead.
So, Greek sentences just full a lot more participles than English sentences are. In English, so for example, in Greek, oftentimes, where in English we would say something like, when he entered the room, I looked at him. There, in English, I have that clause, when he entered the room. Right, and then the main clause, I looked at him. Often in Greek, they would prefer not to use a whole sort of clause like when he entered the room and use that conjunction when to kind of set up the clause. It'll just throw in a participle to express that idea of when he entered. But the thing about the participle, so in English, we might woodenly translate that as sort of entering the room, or he entering the room, he looked at him, right? In English, our participles are ing words. But you notice if you hear that, as he was entering the room, or he entering the room, he looked at him, you don't really know what the relationship is between the entering and the looked at him. But if I say when he entered the room, he looked at him, then you know, it's a temporal relationship, and the one thing happened first, and then the next thing happened after. So because Greek likes the participle more, you end up having a lot of sentences where there's a connection between the participial clause, entering the room, and the main clause, but grammatically speaking, it's not specified for you what exactly is that relationship. And when it comes time to translate that sentence, they want to put it in sort of good, natural sounding English, as they should. And so they will typically interpret it for you and say, well, I think here it's pretty obviously a temporal relationship, one, this, and then that. So they will translate it when he entered the room, even though that's, really literally speaking, not what the Greek says. Right. So an example in the Bible, 2 Corinthians 8:9, speaking about Jesus, says a translation might say something like, who though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor. Right? Though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor. In the Greek there, what's being translated as though he was rich could be very woodenly rendered as being rich. he, being rich, for your sake became poor. So the translator has to decide, well, what is the relationship between him being rich and for our sake becoming poor? And most translations will understand it as a kind of an although or concessive relationship. Which actually, it's in English, we don't do that with participles as much. We don't use a participle for that although idea. In Greek it does, so it's a legitimate possibility. Him, although he was rich, for his sake became poor. But it's perfectly possible, at least, to consider another possibility, like actually because he was rich, something about out of the fullness of who he is, he thus was in a position to impoverish himself for our sake. Right. Now, I'm not sure if that's really as likely of reading, but I've heard it suggested, and you wouldn't even think about the possibility unless you were looking at the Greek. So that's a I would say the second general payoff, is it allows you to revisit interpretive questions you don't know have been made for you, or that you see are being made, but there's disagreement, you don't know how to think about them. And then if I can continue. So, and then the third area would be questions where you, well, now I'm getting jumbled in my head here. There are cases where you don't even, it is just hard to communicate in translation. There's just things that are hard to bring on translation because no two languages are the same. So here an example we could give, and this is actually not one we got to in Greek class, but at the Last Supper, Jesus is washing his disciples' feet. Right, remember Jesus comes to Peter, right? And do you remember, I don't know, what Peter says? Something like, are you going to wash my feet? Do you wash my feet? Something like that. Which is a perfectly fine translation. What English just can't bring out for you is the exact word order in the Greek. So in the Greek, if I were to really woodenly translate that verse in Greek, it would be literally, do you, my, wash feet? So the word my there, Peter talking about his feet, has actually moved way forward in this sentence from where you'd expect it to be. You would expect it to be right after feet in Greek. So you expect in Greek to be, do you wash feet my, or something like that. But the my's moved way forward in this sentence to right after, do you wash? And if you have the chance to learn a little bit more about the things that can influence Greek word order, you realize, well, that word my there in Greek is in this class of little sort of lightweight words we call clitics. And clitics, as Ndwati can tell you, are these little words that in Greek move around based on where stress is in the sentence. Because they're lightweight, as it were, sort of in terms of how they're said. So they respond to where stress falls in the sentence and can attach themselves to something else that's getting stress. So what that seems to indicate in that verse from John 13, is Peter is putting stress on the word you. Because he says, do you, and then the word right after that is the word my. You wash my feet? Are you washing my feet? And if you can see that that's going on with the word order, it helps to clarify something you might pick up from the context anyway, which that Peter's surprise or horror at what's happening isn't primarily focused, let's say, on his own unworthiness. Because actually maybe a really crude handling of the Greek would say, oh look, the word my moved up, so he's emphasizing my. But if you know enough Greek, you realize, no, he can't be emphasizing my. So his focus isn't on his own unworthiness there. His focus is on Jesus and the fact that it's Jesus rather than somebody else who's washing his feet. And so that's a case where what's being emphasized in a sentence, it can be sometimes clear to you if you have a chance to engage with the original language.
Hey, thank you so much for those distinctions that are very helpful. There's clearly a lot of payoff that comes on the other end of a lot of patient study. So let's talk about a bit about that, and particularly the class setup within NIRT and how that has been happening, how Tim has been teaching that. So tell us kind of the way that you guys have been going through it is studying it as a spoken language.
Yes.
For someone who's hearing this for the first time, what does it mean to learn a language as a spoken language?
Yeah. One, I'm not sure if the technical term is a living language. Is that what you mentioned to us? Or is it?
Yeah, some people will say living language, and some people will say communicative.
I see.
Mhm.
I see.
No one will say spoken, but we'll say it today.
No. That's a component of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's, I think it's been beautiful to learn it that way. So one, this is the first language I'm learning. However, I think the reason why this is unique is that it's not, you wouldn't necessarily hear anyone speaking this out there most of the time. So even the, if I'm not wrong, the Greek that's out there being spoken in Greece and countries like that isn't as, so there are a few words and grammatical patterns, not a few, I think many, but there's a lot more that's also not the same. And so there's that sense in which it's not a language that exists, so to speak, yet we are learning it as is. And what it means is it's the moving away from just looking at charts and learning this is a past tense, this is a present tense, this is a past participle, blah, blah, blah. But like actually going bit by bit. And as we were learning, I thought, I guess this is how a child learns as they're growing up. They're picking up new vocab words day by day, and so they're told this is a potato, and they're like, oh, potato, and they store it up somewhere, and then they learn the next day this is that, and then you also learn verbs, and bit by bit you're building up in a way that you can actually communicate through it. So by the end of week 1, probably like, I'm able to say I threw a potato. Right. And then by the end of week 2, I'm able to say I threw a potato to the farmer. By the end of week 3, I can say desiring to inflict pain, I threw a potato to a farmer. So it's progressive in that sense. And so you're just building up your vocabulary, your grammar and patterns, so to speak. And so it's been wonderful because it was very immersive and at the same time non-threatening. It was like, okay, I can make it. Yeah. Today this week I've learned 10 new words, and you get to use them as you go over your classes, your practice, your readings, and then it just continues to come alive. And so it was very beautiful that slowly and progressively you're learning how to not only see it and recognize it, but you actually are able to construct at will sentences and actually communicate in the language.
So good.
Yeah.
You guys got names, Greek names. The students who didn't know each other's names, actual names, but only knew each other by their... is that part of the immersive culture, that part of that technique of just having people think in a certain way? And what are other tools that you employed in class?
I say taking Greek or Hebrew names. It's just a small additional way to just fill their ears with a little bit more Greek or Hebrew and just tune their ears to the sound patterns of the language. And make them more familiar. So other tools, well, maybe let me step back and say first kind of more broadly or theoretically here. When it comes to teaching ancient languages, there's a spectrum of approaches, right? And we could talk about these two ends of a spectrum. We've just introduced this idea of living language or communicative. That could be kind of one end. The other end of the spectrum is something that's sometimes referred to as grammar translation, in which case you're not necessarily kind of using the language in class the way you would, if you were learning, French or German or something, a modern language. You're just more kind of learning these. There's more of an emphasis on learning certain grammatical rules and patterns, and then you're giving sentences where you try to apply those rules you're learning to example sentences and see if you can translate them accurately into whatever native language you speak. Now, my own conviction is actually it's not that one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum is the perfect approach. I think in most contexts the ideal approach is something of a blend of the two. So I want to add that sort of nuance up front. I think that I see advantages to both approaches, and the question isn't so much which one, but kind of what combination makes most sense with these particular students and the amount of time they're going to have to be able to spend in the language. So the advantages I see on what we might call the grammar translation approach, which would be the more common approach in seminaries, is it is in some respects more efficient, right? Because what you're doing is you're basically abstracting out all of these patterns that are there in the language, and you're saying, hey, look, like notice that whenever you add this ending, right, to this verb, it's indicating, first person singular. And instead of going through and trying to memorize every first person singular form of, every verb out there and sort of memorize them as totally discrete, separate items, notice the pattern. And then you recognize the pattern, and whenever you see that ending, you recognize that's what that means. And, that is actually, a little bit different, I think, from the way children learn. I think the children, when they learn a native language, they pick up on those patterns, but it's not as self-consciously or explicitly. They're kind of more subconsciously pulling the patterns together, and in their heads, eventually they have a framework, but it's not as self-conscious. But I think actually, as adult learners, on the one hand, we have a disadvantage where our brains are less spongy as compared with children. But we have an advantage in the sense that we have analytical thinking capabilities children don't have, and actually we should take advantage of that when learning a language. So I think it's actually very appropriate to on some level be abstracting out those patterns, making those visible to students. Show them a verb chart, show them a noun chart, show them the ways it goes, and let them see the patterns. Those can be helpful shortcuts in a sense. So, and in a similar vein. The meaning that is expressed by a particular verb form, like we could talk about the aorist tense form in Greek, right? If you want to try to get a student to understand what is the meaning that this thing expresses, well, one approach, if you're a very pure communicative living language, you construct all of these different sentences and example stories where you're kind of modeling for them the aorist in action, and letting them just intuit. Okay, eventually, over lots and lots of repetitions, they get a sense of, it kind of has this flavor of meaning because it always used in those ways, right? It's like the difference between deductive and inductive. Right. So the grammar translates as deductive, says, okay, here's what it means, now apply it. Inductive, see lots of examples and kind of pick up how it works. And I think in many respects, it really just makes more sense to be deductive about it. And say, hey, let me explain to you what meaning the aorist tense form encodes, and then it's going to get complicated, but you can have a basic sense of it. You can do that way more efficiently, just explaining it, right? So that's it's in many ways more efficient, and also let me say, we are inevitably going to pick up false intuitions about the language, because Greek or Hebrew is different from English or Kiswahili or whatever languages you already know, and it's very natural as a language learner to kind of let the way your language works try to map that onto the language you're learning in ways that actually aren't true. And if all I'm ever doing is totally inductive and just giving you examples, you might be kind of starting to develop these mistaken intuitions about the language. Just kind of thinking, it's just like the English this, and you kind of map that meaning onto it in your head. Whereas if I'm willing to be deductive about it and say, well, actually, you know what, this looks a lot like this English construction, but let me tell you, it actually doesn't quite mean the same thing. So it also allows you to nuance and correct against false intuitions, to be deductive. So in praise of deductive teaching, those are things I want to say, actually. And so we do have a lot of that in the classroom as well. That would look more traditional. The advantage of also incorporating more inductive, or what we call communicative elements, where let's say, we're using Greek or Hebrew names, and we're like saying simple sentences back and forth in class. I ask them, where are you? And Duarte has to tell me, I'm in front of the table. And he says that to me in Hebrew or Greek. The advantage of doing those things is that mode of learning, I think, leads to more durable and more fluent connections in your head between form and meaning, right? Because there's something that's more visceral and more direct or immediate that happens in your mind when you just you kind of experience, standing in front of the table and telling me I'm standing in front of the table. So it's slower because it takes a lot more repetitions to form those connections. but the connections that you do form will last a lot longer. They'll last you beyond the quiz you have to take next week. I think, for further out as you're trying to read the Bible in your life going forward. And it's not just more durable, but it's more fluent. So, because if it's all deductive, then your head's going to be full of a lot of charts, which, my head has some charts in it, and the charts can be helpful. But if it's all charts, those charts are ultimately like a middleman between form and meaning, right? You see a particular word, you say, oh wait, that looks like this form, and your mind starts running through a chart in your head until you get to a certain point in the chart, and then once you find the spot in the chart and you think, oh, that row equates to this meaning, then your mind can latch onto the meaning.
Right.
But if you've had some communicative practice with it, you maybe don't have to go hunting through a chart. You see the word and instantly the meaning hits you. And so then when it comes time to actually read the Bible, which is what this is all aimed at, you can see it and immediately recognize, oh, it means that. And you can spend less mental energy, kind of hunting through charts, and more mental energy thinking about the text and interpreting the text. And a couple of other things I would say in terms of advantages, I do think when you have some communicative elements, like we're speaking in class, we're saying practice sentences, I'm asking simple questions, simple answers, it also just gives students a chance to hear the language a lot more. And again, the goal is not to develop a really high skill level in hearing Greek and being able to comprehend it, right? This is all aimed at reading skill, not listening skill. But what people understand now is that the ear is really foundational for reading. That actually when you read, even if you're reading silently, in your brain, you are still sounding out the words. We call this subvocalization. And actually, the only time you don't do this is if you learn the technique of speed reading. The technique of speed reading works by actually circumventing this thing your brain normally does and blocking that tendency to vocalize the text in your head silently. And that allows you to move faster. But I'm not trying to teach anybody to speed read the New Testament. So somebody would want to read normally.
Hopefully not, yeah.
So actually, if you get just really, really solid and the sounds of the language, it's going to be easy to read it.
Right.
And it's also, I would say, one other side advantage is it's just a lot easier to throw in lots of simple examples, repetitive examples, if you're doing some spoken things, right? I can just, in the space of 5 minutes, right? We can pack in several really simple back and forth examples of how it goes. And it just helps students get a pick up a feel.
Right. Yeah. And just thanks for just that passing comment that the payoff here is to be able to read the Bible better. It's Jesus we want to know, and it's Jesus we want to tell other people about. And so there's a lot of diligence that's needed. You need to apply yourself if you're going to grow in this skill. So Nduati, what are some particular skills you'd encourage the incoming student if someone is considering to learn about to learn the biblical languages? What are some things that they want to pray that the Lord would grant them the grace to have? What are some particular outworkings of diligence that one needs?
Maybe I can just start off by sharing where I'm at right now. So I think I'm doing Hebrew, and it's requiring a lot of patience and being able to put in the work. So it felt slower than Greek. But I want to believe even when I was doing Greek, it was also slower than the English I know. But that's the process. It's just, you have these letters in Hebrew that needs to be drawn quite artistically, and you're drawing it for the first time and you're learning. And so before you used to write one word in, half a second. Now you're taking maybe 5 seconds just to write one word. But that's the journey. And so I guess it's just a lot of patience in terms of being willing to be there for a while.
Right.
And I guess that's the idea. It's when God invites us to do his work, we would be assuming because it's God's work that it's going to be easy. And so whatever work God assigns us to, sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it's a lot of work. And so there's that idea of patience. But something else as well is Okay, now it's me and my brain going away. But also putting in time, and not all at once, but taking time throughout the week to do it. So
don't wait till the last night before the class to do all the assignments.
One, you get overwhelmed, but just number two, for the sake of long-term memory, it's easier. The same way you speak English every day, or speak whatever language, your native language, and hence it's automatic. It's because of that daily, repeated, frequent nature of it. Right. And so the same thing, as much as you can, don't wait till the last minute. Okay. Try as much as possible to bit by bit, day by day, a little bit, ingest something every day. Something of the sort. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. This has been a lot. I've learned so much. There's so much I need to actually listen again and unpack. So beneficial. Would either of you brothers like to close for us with your favorite verse in Greek?
Do you have one in Duati?
Well, I'm trying to...
What is having to come up with one right in front of his teacher. You should see how intensely Tim is looking at him.
Actually, I wanted to go for John 11:35.
Let's go.
Can I remember the actual word? So it's Jesus wept.
The Jesus is there, right?
Yeah, so it's Jesus. It's not crazy. It's something like Krav. Not Krav Maga. Kraz. So Tim is showing me. I'm trying to get it. Give me a second. Krav.
It's actually, it wasn't one of the vocabularies.
It
was a new word.
But it's related to it, and it starts with cry, if I'm not wrong. Let me just say. Oh.
Okay, let's go.
You're doing the word for a noun word to this one, right?
Yeah. Dakruon. So it was Edakrusen or Jesus. Anyway.
Jesus wept.
Yeah, hard to read that.
Yeah, and you shared earlier in the podcast how
this whole bit was very
used of the Lord to edify you.
It did something that I can't explain. But anyway, so I actually have to come clean and say I don't know any verse in Greek in full. I don't think I do. But if I can read it, I can read it.
Yeah,
and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
Tim has a whole chapter. He'll
do you want to give us one?
Narrate before us.
Sure. So it's hard to pick one, but from the Beatitudes, I like Makariu ukataru te kardia, oti autu don theon opsonte. So I could translate that as happy are the pure in heart, for God they will see.
Amen. Thank you so much, brothers.
Beautiful.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more about NIRT, go to ekklesia afrika.org, and there you'll find the Nairobi Institute of Reformed Theology. God bless you. Bye.